The first week of the NBA offseason is complete, and we have already seen a ton go down, with much speculated to happen in the near future. New York made a trade that could swing the power balance in the Eastern Conference, the Bulls made a trade that made me sick to my stomach, and the 2024 draft ended up being a lot more interesting than originally anticipated, with some pretty shocking selections for a draft that was expected to be uncontroversial. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We are trying to hit 200K by the end of the year. Also drop a like on the video as it helps it do better in the algorithm, so it's much appreciated. Before I get into today's video, I want to talk about our sponsor, Factor. Factor makes your nutrition goals easy by delivering fresh, never frozen meals right to your door. And for the people like me who have a hectic schedule, being able to prepare something quickly with Factor really helps. All it takes is 2 minutes in the microwave and my meal is ready. Factor also offers options that make it easy to stick to my goals. You can specify these options to your lifestyle or dietary restrictions. For me, I went with Protein Plus because I've been hitting the gym a lot more lately, and when things get hectic, Factor is flexible. Change your order up every week with plans from 4 to 18 meals per week, or pause and reschedule your deliveries anytime. Plus, Factor now offers loads of snack options like breakfast, smoothies, juices, small bites, and more to keep me going no matter what's on the schedule. In the past, I've struggled to stay on top of my meal plan and picked fast options that were not necessarily the healthiest ones, and definitely not cheap. But now, because of Factor, when I don't have the time to prepare something, I can both get the convenience and nutrition, as well as a great taste. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code ALSORUSTY50 to get 50% off of your first box and 20% off of your next month of orders. That's code ALSORUSTY50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off of your first box plus 20% off of your next month of orders. And thanks again to Factor for sponsoring today's video. With that said, let's get into the major moves that have happened thus far. We're going to go ahead and start with the big one that I unfortunately was not able to cover live. Mikal Bridges is a member of the New York Knicks. He was traded from Brooklyn, which, by the way, first time those two teams have made a trade in 50 years. Even back when they were just in New Jersey, the Knicks had no interest in giving them any kind of deal. But this is one that's been speculated on for a while. I didn't think it would happen because of the history of these franchises, but apparently Brooklyn decided to put that shit aside and just get objectively a phenomenal deal. We have been giving them a lot of shit. I think NBA fans in general have been giving them shit for their unwillingness to trade Mikal Bridges. However, looking at what they managed to pull off here, I don't think there's any arguing. They made a phenomenal move. They got back basically 7 first-round picks. There's the protection stuff and swap stuff, so it's like a little bit muddy, but a lot of fucking draft capital. And they ended up exchanging some of it that they got from New York in exchange for their own draft picks for the next 2 years, which were in Houston because of the James Harden trade. So Brooklyn now has an incentive to tank. They have an incentive to be a bad team. The reason why they didn't have any interest in trading Mikal in the past is Mikal was the reason that they were not the worst team in the league, honestly. Like him, Claxton, and like a couple of competent role players was enough for the Nets to be not the worst. However, they want to be bad, they just can't until now. Now they have license to because they can tank, and if they tank, they're gonna get their own draft pick, where previously, if they were the worst team in the league, that just means good things for Houston. So that's a huge move from them. Honestly, don't think they could have gotten anything better. In general, looking at the trades that were offered to them in the past, that you look at them and you kind of shake your head, but they waited long enough because they really had no reason to do anything but wait, and they got back truly the most important asset that they could have, which is control over their own destiny. So that's their side of this. And then for New York, this immediately got really interesting because at the time of the trade, OG Anunoby had not yet re-signed with the New York Knicks. He has since re-signed with the New York Knicks. So we know that OG and Mikal Bridges are going to be teammates on the New York Knicks going into next year, 2 of the best defensive forwards in the entire league. Mikal's defense definitely fell off quite a bit with Brooklyn as he focused more of his energy on shot creation, and I think the fact that it was just not a competitive, contending environment, he just kind of stopped giving that effort. But I have no doubt that he will more than display the DPOY candidate tier defense that he has displayed in the past. honest. That said, he was a DPOY candidate and maybe the worst defensive player of the year race ever, and especially the worst one that I've ever witnessed. Mikal Bridges is a hell of a defender. OG is a hell of a defender. And to have that much wing defense available to you, because you also, of course, have Josh Hart, that's pretty fucking phenomenal. The big thing that was speculated, though, after this was that maybe Julius Randle would be moved because the Knicks were a little hesitant to give OG as much money as he was capable of making. Obviously, making the Bridges trade, you feel more comfortable signing back OG. And I do want to make this point for New York because I have seen a lot of people suggest that this was a poor decision from them, that they are giving up too many assets for Mikal Bridges. Something I think NBA fans do not appreciate enough is it's not always just about how good that individual player is. Mikal Bridges himself is not worth what New York traded for him. I agree. However, he is absolutely worth what he brings to the Knicks and what the Knicks look like in general with him now a part of that equation. Like, yes, if you're starting off with Mikal Bridges and you trade all that, that's stupid. You shouldn't trade all those assets for just one guy, but if you're, at least in your mind, one guy away from actually being able to really fuck with Boston in the Eastern Conference, then you make that move. It's not as simple as how good that guy is. It's much more about how good he can make you be just by the fact that he's that little bit extra on top of the great team you already have. Now, Julius Randle being traded is something that has been speculated on because honestly, last year we saw that with him out, it seemed more optimal than not to have OG and Josh Hart as your starting forwards, with OG at the 4 and Hartenstein, Mitchell Robinson, your 5s. And then your offensive scoring backcourt of DiVincenzo and Brunson. When I look at the current rotation, I feel like I would rather have OG at the 4, Mikal at the 3, DiVincenzo at the 2, Brunson at the 1, and I guess right now you're going with Mitchell Robinson at the center, which the center position is another thing that you have to address. Maybe you could address that with Julius Randle in a trade. However, something that's been speculated on quite a bit is actually the possibility of trading him for Paul George. Paul George rumors in general are a thing that have to be discussed. If they were able to land someone like Paul George, then at that point, like, you have an insane amount of wing depth around this like god tier shot creating point guard. Concern about the center depth, no doubt. Mitchell Robinson is a pretty damn fine center. He's a solid starter. However, he is very injury prone, and I believe while he's gotten better at it, he is still foul out prone. So probably their biggest thing to address right now is getting a backup center who's not just a guy who checks the box of a backup center, but is actually a good backup center. Bringing back Isaiah Hartenstein's looking like it's just not going to happen now because the salary cap, they're already pretty much maxed out. But trading Randle for some other wing, trading him for a center, trading him really in any capacity to where you can just have an approach that the Boston Celtics do, ironically, which is you just have a bunch of wings and a bunch of creators who can all create their own shot, who can all make good decisions with the ball in their hands, who can all hit, catch, and shoot threes, all attack off of the catch, all of that shit. I like it, and I feel like Julius kind of interferes with that. And the reason why a PG for Randle swap could make some sense is that the Clippers, I believe James Harden's back on contract, I'm pretty sure. And then Kawhi Leonard is back on a contract for an extended period of time. So they intend on being a competitive team, regardless of if Paul George leaves or not. So with that said, potentially Julius Randle is like the best player that you can get in a Paul George sign and trade. I don't know. It's something that I'm going to be paying attention to for sure. In general, Paul George is someone to pay attention to because he also, of course, has these rumors for the Warriors and the Sixers. There was actually briefly some discussions between the Denver Nuggets and the Clippers for a sign-and trade involving Paul George, where Michael Porter Jr. would be heading to the Clippers. However, they didn't really feel like it was worth investing, max money into a 35, 36-year-old Paul George when Michael is as young as he is, and they would have to give up a ton of draft capital. It's kind of like, it's not a bad swing, but the problem is if it's a swing and a miss, you're really stuck in the trenches there. The Warriors move is the one that is really gaining steam lately. Hasn't really been something that was rumored like that going into it, but we've just seen his name and the Warriors come up over and over and over again, and it makes sense because, at least to me, Paul George is the perfect type of player to fit in the play style of the Golden State Warriors. Now, Stephen A. Smith seemed to disagree because he said that Paul George, quote, can't catch and shoot. He said that he can't catch and shoot, can't be a catch and shoot player. I don't know why people listen to him talk. But that said, the Warriors, he can catch and shoot. He's one of the best catch and shoot players in the entire league and one of the highest volume catch and shoot players in the entire league. Arguably the best three-point shooter over 6'8" in NBA history. On top of that, he has some shot creating ability and he's a good defender, although that has slipped a little bit in recent years. He's certainly not Defensive Player of the Year candidate caliber like he was in the past. But he fits the Warrior system. He can essentially just be, I mean, worst case scenario, he's basically what Klay Thompson was a couple of years ago. Like, very good three-point shooter and a great defender, and he's even bigger at that. And I think in terms of what the Warriors could actually piece together, what the market could be for them for a star, Paul George might be as good as it's going to get, because the young players that they have, they simultaneously refuse to trade, but also simultaneously will not develop and allow them to show if they're valuable or not, so NBA franchises do not really value them that significantly. So I'm a little frustrated with the Warriors in general with their approach, because there's a lot of reports suggesting they do not intend on moving any of their young assets, which I think is just fucking dumb for a variety of reasons. If they can make a Paul George move happen, I will give them a lot of credit. That would be great. That's about as good as you can do, I think, in the circumstances they're currently in. The Sixers move, the Sixers don't even have to make any trades. They just have straight up the cap space to sign Paul George if they want to. So that's a luxury that a lot of other NBA franchises do not have, and that could mean that Paul George ends up there just because of the ease in which it can happen. I don't really feel like Paul George is going to be a Clipper at this point. It really seems like everything is leaning in the direction of him going somewhere else. As it relates to other rumors of players potentially leaving their teams, the other big one is KCP, almost seeming likely to leave the Nuggets at this point. He's looking to get like $25 million a year, which isn't too high for KCP, honestly, just given what the market looks like today. Emmanuel Quickley just signed a contract for $35 million a year. 25 mil ain't really shit anymore, but it is a little bit steep for Denver. Now, they did trade Reggie Jackson, who was making about $5 million, so that softens the cap a little bit. I think they're trying to avoid the second apron. I still don't really fully understand how the CBA this year works. They cleared some space. They're probably going to bring him back, but I will say, if they do lose him, it's going to be rough. I understand you look at KCP, you see he scores like 8-9 points per game, you know, shoots fine from three, but not super high volume, does a little bit of creation inside the arc here or there. But his defense is integral. While I do believe Jokic's defensive flaws are dramatically overblown, at the end of the day, he does need strong point of attack defenders around him in order for him to not get consistently put in situations where his weaknesses are on full display. KCP was borderline all defense this year. I don't think he made it, but I think he was like close. Losing him would be a huge blow. On top of the fact that you lost Bruce Brown in the previous offseason, I saw a quote from the Nuggets, someone within the Nuggets front office, that suggested that they're not too worried because they think Christian Brown can take KCP's spot. No, he can't. Not unless he just has some miracle level offseason where he completely turns it around as a three-point shooter. And while Christian Brown is a good defender, he is not KCP. Denver would take an extra L there in an offseason where they need to be getting wins, and that's pretty terrifying. Apparently, the number one target they have in terms of replacing KCP would be Klay Thompson. I think offensively speaking, that could honestly be even better for you because Klay is a better shooter and overall scorer than KCP, and I think he'd fit well alongside Nikola Jokic. Great catch and shoot guy, decent cutter. Obviously, that's a guy who fits well with Jokic. The defense would not even be anywhere close to the same tier, and Klay has a large tendency to hijack the offense and do a little bit too much, where KCP is never really doing a little bit too much. So for that reason, if you're Denver, you better be praying that KCP is back. Moving on to some deals that actually happened. The Wizards made a pretty weird trade with the Portland Trailblazers where they moved Denny Avdija for Malcolm Brogdon and the 14th pick. My guess there is that they didn't really believe in Denny in the way that a lot of other teams seem to believe in Denny, and then Brogdon probably can get flipped for a first from a contender, and the 14th pick is the 14th pick. I don't remember who they drafted with it, but I understand to an extent why they made this decision, but I also feel like Denny was young enough and good enough and just had a great season that I would have just kept him. For Portland, you're getting a young 3-and-D player who is a pretty damn good playmaker as well, and I think that's a good player to have alongside Scoot Henderson. I like the move. It's interesting. I was a little hesitant for it from Washington's side of things, especially because, like, we've been talking about you guys trading Kyle Kuzma forever, and then you fucking trade the forward that your fans actually want to be on the team. Interesting choice there. Tim Hardaway Jr. traded for Quentin Grimes. I think this is a home run move for the Dallas Mavericks. Grimes, not as good on the Pistons for the little bit of run that he did get, and then most of the season last year he spent with the Knicks, where Tom Thibodeau seemed entirely disinterested in playing him the same way that he did in the previous year when he was awesome. The year before this last one, Quentin Grimes averaged 11 points per game, shot 39% from three, doing so on just under 6 attempts per game. And here's the real kicker. He is making $15 million less than Tim Hardaway Jr. is. So you've traded for a guy who, if his shot is not falling, at the bare minimum, he is a good defender, but he's also not someone who takes stupid shots like Tim Hardaway Jr. routinely does. It's a home run, as far as I'm concerned. Tim was virtually unplayable in the postseason. I think Quentin Grimes will be definitely playable. In fact, I think I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up being essentially, if not the first guy off of the bench, like the second one. So that's a great move from them. It's a good start to their offseason because making the finals again is nothing resembling a guarantee right now, especially with Victor Wembanyama on the horizon. Who knows how many years you have now before you have to actually factor that into the equation. But this is a good move. Good start to the offseason for Dallas. I hope they plan on doing more, though. Let's go ahead and move on to the 2024 draft. This one ended up being a little bit more controversial, and people had a lot more to say about it than I and most people originally anticipated, because going into it, everyone's been saying this is one of the worst draft classes in the last few years and potentially in NBA history. Now, before I talk about anything else, I do want to make this point that I was kind of losing my fucking mind with the way people have been talking about this draft the last couple of years, and it actually specifically related to some shit I said about Josh Giddey. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about Josh Giddey at the end of the video. I've already made a full thing on him, but I want to add a little bit more to the conversation that's beyond my initial reaction. Just because this draft is not highly touted does not mean there are not good players in it. Does not mean there are not guys who can absolutely determine playoff series and even final series in the future, because there can be a good role player in the second round. There can be a good role player at the end of the first round, and that's the case of any NBA draft. We don't know for sure that this draft is just full of a bunch of duds. Really, if anything, this draft seemed like a role player draft. The guy that the Hawks selected first overall, a lot of scrutiny for that pick. The commentators were saying, yeah, he could be a really good 3-and-D guy. Yeah, the first overall pick, a 3-and-D guy. That's just what this draft is, and I get it. That's disappointing, but role players matter a lot, and if your team had the opportunity to draft a really impactful role player and they passed on it, that was fucking dumb, and they should be criticized for it. I don't care if the rest of the draft is not amazing. You don't just throw away draft picks, and you don't just throw away players like that. And I've seen so many people like, okay, we're past pick 10, nothing could possibly matter from here on. It's not true. Fit matters a lot, like for example, Dalton Knecht going to the Los Angeles Lakers. Think that's going to end up working out. He's an older rookie, but he is a fantastic three-point shooter and has some juice creating inside the half court. Obviously, JJ Redick likes three-point shooters. There is apparently some report that the moment that the Lakers drafted him, JJ was drawing up plays for the guy. So picks like that matter a lot. That's all I'm going to say. With that, the Hawks select this 3-and-D dude, this long forward whose jump shot, what's it? Ricochet. Tall forward, good defender, questionable jumper, almost zero shot creation. I should add, by the way, with everything I'm saying about these draft prospects, this is what I have heard. I have listened to many people talk about these guys, but I haven't done the research myself, and I'm not going to speak as confidently with that, on top of the fact that historically I'm pretty bad at evaluating how players not in the NBA will translate to the NBA. Except Desmond Bane. Rudy has pointed out, I did say that Desmond Bane would be the steal of the draft, and he was. Not a good pick, probably, because I think if there's one guy in this draft that I would pick to be a star, and not just a star, like a perennial all-star tier guy, it would be Alexander Sarr. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if there was anyone to pick, it would be him, because he just is the prototypical, very athletic, crazy defender, big man who has the ability to catch lobs, finish pretty well, and he has shown some signs, as far as I am aware, of having a jump shot potentially. I would have taken him, and I know there's like stuff about Sarr not wanting to go there. Regardless of how ethical this is, and maybe players don't like it, so it gives you a bad reputation around the league, but I feel like, tough luck, man. We're still drafting you. That's what we can do. That's the power we have, so we're going to use it. But they didn't go that route. They went with someone who wanted to be there, which could mean less drama, but could also mean taking a significantly worse player. Obviously, Sacramento did this back with Luka in 2018 when they took Marvin Bagley. Yeah, you should have said, suck it, Luka. We don't care. We're drafting you. They didn't, and they're regretting it now. Obviously, things are going good, but come on, it'd be nice if you had Luka. Buzelis. Matas Buzelis. That's who the Chicago Bulls picked with the 11th pick in the draft. I feel very conflicted on this one, because on one hand, he fell. He was being projected as high as number 5 to Detroit. There were a lot of people who were high on Buzelis. However, I feel like the reason he fell in the draft was because people should not have been that high on Buzelis. A lot of the stuff that I heard from my draft people is that Buzelis is probably not going to work out. He's more of an idea player than an actual player. That said, the idea is interesting. He is a athletic forward. He actually gives me some flashes of Andre Karolinko in there. That's looking at his highlights, not looking at what he looks like possession to possession on the floor. But, you know, he's a really good shot blocker, good defender in general. It's really his offense that is more the question. He has some ability to attack off of the catch, but he's not like a lead ball handler in any capacity. And his 3-ball was great in high school, terrible in the G League for the G League Ignite. I'm not really sure how to feel about the pick. Apparently it's white boy summer for the Chicago Bulls. I also don't really know about his fit with Giddey. The Bulls are one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league, and then they decided to trade for one of the worst three-point shooters in the league, and they decided to draft a guy whose jump shot was questionable, mind you, for like the 4th time in a row. Kobe White's the last guy the Bulls drafted where it was like, is this guy's jumper even going to work? In the case of Patrick Williams, it did, but everyone else, no. No, the jumper did not work. I'm hoping that's different with Buzelis. Donovan Clingan fell to number 7 to Portland. He was also someone who fell a little bit. I think that's a great pick for them. The fact that they got him and Denny Avdia is really interesting. I think that's, going to make them more competitive going into next year. It's interesting what this actually means for DeAndre Ayton. I would not be surprised to see him playing for another team next year after this draft pick. There was a lot of hate for Charlotte's draft pick, whose name is Tijan Salon. Sorry if it's definitely wrong. But a lot of people were hating on that pick. The footage that the Charlotte Hornets posted of him working out was brutal, man. Ugly ass jump shot. Slow jump shot. And I think, especially with forwards and bigs, which I believe he is a power forward, people can overrate how important a jumper being slow is, because oftentimes that type of player is going to be open with a lot of space. But it's very bad. Like, it's not bad, it's a very bad jump shot, and it's concerning that you drafted someone who doesn't play the center position who has that bad of a jump shot. I think the idea there for Charlotte is like you have the shot creation and ball handling of LaMelo, you have the wing attack approach offensively from Brandon Miller, so maybe bring in like this bruiser, defensive-minded forward who just connects on offense. I don't know. His jump shot's probably going to have to change. I don't know if I can see him being a even remotely reliable shooter with the jump shot that he has. The Spurs drafted Rob Dillingham, but they would immediately trade him to Minnesota for 2 future first-round picks. It's interesting. I kind of understand why both teams did this. It was a little bit blindsiding at first because you look at him, Dillingham was a pretty well-touted prospect. Would have been cool to bring in both of those guys, but I think I know what they're doing here, which is they are preparing for a bigger trade. I think they're thinking that both of these first are 2030 first-round picks. I think one of them has a protection and the other doesn't. I think the logic there is those are more attractive assets than Dillingham is himself. Also, you don't have to take on a roster spot to take on draft picks. So I think this was in preparation for a bigger move, and the Spurs were saying, look, we got our guy with the 4th pick, someone we're actually interested in, not really interested in the rest of this draft, so let's go ahead and dip out and get some assets that we can flip later on. But for Minnesota, they're getting a lottery point guard, which I don't think anyone expected them to be walking away with a lottery draft pick here. But they were doing this in the hopes of replacing Mike Conley in the future. I have no doubt Mike Conley will be a more prominent part of the rotation to start this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year you saw that line start to blur a little bit, and if by 2 years from now, 3 years from now, Dillingham has outright replaced the guy, because Conley's getting up there in age. He's still very effective, but whenever a player is past the age of like 33, you're like, kind of looking at him sideways like, all right, man, when's the fall off coming? Because we know it's coming. Rudy just made the point to me that this was essentially the only way they could get a backup point guard potentially of this quality and a potential future replacement of Conley at this quality, because otherwise you're not getting a point guard that has that much upside for $5 million a year. So this is essentially like circumventing the cap in a way, avoiding having to pay the price that you would normally have to pay. Hopefully those future first round picks don't come to bite them in the ass, but I do feel like Anthony Edwards will probably still be there in 6 years, and thus they will not be one of the worst teams in the league. But who knows? Anything is possible. Zach Giddey was selected by the Memphis Grizzlies at the 9th pick. That was really interesting because it was kind of up in the air who that draft pick would actually be, where Zach would actually go. A lot of people expected him to drop as low as like 18 to 20, but also could see him going this high. This draft is weird. No one really knew what they were doing, so the Grizzlies were like, fuck it. We like Zach Giddey. We think he fills the exact problems we have, which is they need a center. The idea of Jaren at center is nice, but I really just don't think it works. And one, to think that rebounding in general is something that people can overrate a little bit, but there's a line. And Jaren is well beyond, or well below, however you'd put it. He is not a good enough rebounder to play the center position, just straight up. The idea is you get Zach Giddey in there. He does some more of the big man dirty work, finishing in the paint, offensive rebounds in general. He just serves as the big body at the basket. And then Jaren can be like in that Giannis help side, weak side shot blocker, free safety type role, which I think is the one he was always designed to play. And he still did that to some degree in the last year with Memphis, but because he had to play the center position, he just was not free to be the type of the defender he's supposed to be, which is why you actually saw his shot blocking numbers go down pretty dramatically. But I think Zach Giddey is going to be a solid NBA player. I know there was a lot of discussion about what his ceiling actually is. I don't think he's going to be a star, but I do think he can be as good as like Steven Adams or like a Ivica Zubac. These guys are not amazing picks. They're not amazing players, but they are what you need. And if you're the 9th pick and you're the Grizzlies and you already have like 3.5, depending on how you feel about Marcus Smart, like core guys on that roster, at that point, you can afford to draft somebody who you don't necessarily see as having a crazy amount of upside, but you do know will be there in the future. Also, I should say 4.5 because I forgot about Gigi Jackson. Yeah, I feel pretty great about this Grizzlies team though. Like if I'm just like looking at what that core looks like going forward, it could be really interesting. Obviously, they've already been competitive before, but I think they have a little bit more reinforcement now than they did in the past. Every time the Grizzlies were like a quote-unquote contender, it really felt like they were like in that category, but they were hanging on by a thread and just juicing up the players who are not your core guys a little bit more, I think is the difference between them hanging on a thread and actually being a pretty fucking terrifying contender. I think defensively they could be awesome. Like if Zach Giddey moves his feet well enough and the Memphis defensive scheme keeps him in the right position well enough to where he's not getting exploited, then I think that defense could be scary because you have this giant waiting around the basket, and then you have this 7-footer who can jump 80 inches in the air and send your shot up to the 100th row. Like, that's a scary prospect on top of Marcus Smart on the perimeter. So yeah, I like this move for the Grizzlies. I understand it is a little bit of a gamble, but I also think it's the most interesting decision that they could have made, and I will always appreciate a swing like that. The Lakers draft Dalton Knecht. Obviously, the Lakers have needed shooting, and he is going to fit perfectly into that. But I think what stood out to me when I watched his tape was, yeah, he can shoot. His jumper's a little slow, so that was something that concerned me a little bit. Like, Rudy immediately compared him to JJ Redick, but I was like, just because these are two white dudes who can shoot doesn't mean they're the same, because JJ Redick was a movement shooter through and through. That was his whole thing, was that JJ can come flying off of a screen, doesn't even really need to bother to set his feet. He's throwing that shit like a slingshot. Knecht's not that type of guy. He is a standstill catch and shoot. I'm not saying he won't come off of screens, but there's a difference between coming off of a screen, setting your feet, and coming off of a screen, and in the split second that a defender isn't there to the point that it's a bad shot, you're able to fire it. So Dalton's not like that, but the thing that really stood out to me, he is he's sneaky athletic, let's say that. He's a white dude who can kind of jump, so that means his athleticism is really sneaky. But he's a strong finisher, like regardless if it's a dunk or a layup, he was really aggressive going to the basket. Obviously, there's a difference between doing that in college and doing it in the league, especially as an older college player. But I think there is going to be a good amount of attacking off of the catch stuff there, a good amount of him being able to be used as a backdoor option. I think he even caught a few lobs in that mix. So yeah, dude has some potential to be really impactful for the Lakers. I really don't know if they could have gotten a better pick at this spot. And speaking of their picks, they then selected Bronny James 55th overall. I don't have a lot to say about what this means for actual basketball reasons, but I will say, obviously this is nepotism. I don't think anyone with any remote sense of logic would argue otherwise. It's nepotism through and through. However, what bothers me is that the criticism often falls on the shoulders of the kid who is being propelled into this situation mostly against their will. I'm not saying Bronny James doesn't want to be in the NBA, he doesn't want to be drafted by the Lakers, and he doesn't want to be a basketball player. I have no doubt that he does want all of those things, but did he want them to happen in this way? Or is that just what was always going to happen because his father is LeBron James and he plays for the Lakers? To me, the second thing is the answer, and blaming the 18, 19, 20-year-old, whatever the fuck he is, for that, I think is really silly. You should be blaming LeBron, and you should be blaming the Lakers organization, okay? I don't think Bronny was pining for and saying, like, yeah, you guys better draft me. I don't really think that was, I think it was Chris Haynes, not Chris Haynes. Chris Haynes is a reporter. What's the agent? Rich Paul. I think Chris Haynes reported that Rich Paul reported that Rich Paul was telling other teams not to draft him in the second round. That's not Bronny's fault. It's not. And there's no way around it. It's not Bronny's fault. So let's not be rude. Let's not be a dick to this 19-year-old. It's going to happen. It's the internet. The internet doesn't give a fuck. But I don't know, it's sad. I kind of felt bad for Bronny throughout this entire process. Last but not least, I do want to quickly bring back the Josh Giddey talk. I obviously gave my initial reaction in the last video, but I've had some time to think about it. And my opinion of this being a stupid trade hasn't changed. Was I maybe 5% too harsh in that initial reaction? Sure. A lot of people were surprised by that, given that in the past, while I have been critical of Josh Giddey, I haven't necessarily been as mean about it. Fair or unfair, if a basketball player is on my team, I'm going to be meaner about it because I have a lot lower level of tolerance for someone wasting another team's time than I do for mine, especially given that the Chicago Bulls are habitual time wasters. To me, building around in any capacity Josh Giddey is no different than building around Zach LaVine. It is the same problem, just on opposite ends of the offensive spectrum. Both of these guys are guards who play fucking shit defense, terrible defensive players, and they also offensively only contribute one thing: For Josh Giddey, it's passing. For Zach LaVine, it is scoring. Being that one-dimensional offensively as a guy that you build around is stupid, and you don't do that in this league. True point guards are bullshit. Pure scorers are bullshit. If you're a pure scorer and can't pass, or you're a true point guard and can't score, I don't want you anywhere near your team, near my team. They can go near your team. I don't care about your team. They can't go near my team. So from that standpoint, that's why I'm very anti-Josh Giddey, because I think if you look around the league, which team's primary initiator is a guy who can't score 20 points per game? Like the guy who literally is the causality of how most of that offense functions. It's inherently going to be some sort of dude who can score the fucking ball across the league. That is the case. There is not an example of a Josh Giddey type of player being anywhere near prominence in an offensive system, other than Josh Giddey in the past with OKC. Now, a lot of people have pointed out that Josh Giddey in his second year averaged 16, 7, and 7. And yeah, those are good box score averages. However, it's also the same box score averages that Michael Carter motherfucking Williams averaged. Okay? Putting up box score stats does not mean you're a good NBA player, and it doesn't mean you're going to be a good one in the future, especially when every advanced metric says that you are a net negative on the floor for your team. Josh Giddey had a negative 9.5 on off in that season where he averaged those numbers, okay? That means his team was basically 10 points better when his ass was sitting on the bench, okay? That's not a winning basketball player. And I have seen some people argue, well, that was just the situation in OKC, man. Okay? There was no opportunity for him. He was second in usage this year and last year. He has had plenty of opportunity. He gets plenty of shots. He gets more wide open three-pointers than anyone in the league. He has the highest percentage of his three-point makes being wide open, as in a defender is not within 6 feet in the entire fucking league. He still shot 32% from three, being that wide open all the time. Okay? That's the type of player we're talking about. And to me, it is foolish to think that this guy can be anything beyond, at best, a quality starter, and I do not even think he can be that. So the notion that we're going to go into this season and Josh Giddey is going to lead our offense, and then we're going to give him a bunch of money to keep doing that in the future, it's just going to be another 4 to 5 years fucking wasted on a player who only pretends to have talent but does not actually impact winning the game of basketball. So no, my take hasn't changed. It has gone more severe in the other direction, because at the time my reaction was not even backed up by the advanced metrics. It was just my pure eye test. But my eye test was right. He fucking sucks at actually making his team better. I don't care if you average 16, 7, and 7 if your team is down 10 points because you were on the floor. I don't know why people can't get past that, why they just look purely at box score numbers. I really don't understand it. I also don't understand why people think just because a player put up respectable numbers at the age of 21, it means that they're the next Luka Doncic. Like, I've seen people call the guy a perennial all-star in the future. That's one of the worst takes I've ever heard. And people keep going, wow, watch how this ages. Look, if it ages wrong, it'll be because Josh Giddey fundamentally changed as a basketball player. Josh Giddey, in his present state, has shown more than enough in the time that he has played that he is not a positive basketball player. And he has had plenty of run, he has had plenty of opportunity, and he's had plenty of good talent around him. You know, as a non-floor spacer, you want to be surrounded by floor spacers. Guess what? In OKC, he was surrounded by floor spacers. What does Chicago have? They just drafted Buzelis, who is maybe a non-shooter. DeMar DeRozan is a non-shooter. Nikola Vucevic shoots 30% from three. No one on the bench can shoot the ball. Alex Caruso was our only 40% three-point shooter, and they just traded him. Ayo Dosunmu, Kobe White, and Patrick Williams are the only players on this roster right now that can shoot a three at a competent NBA level, and that's the team that he is inheriting. So good luck, Josh. Not going to go well. I am as certain of that as I really could be. Again, unless he just learns how to shoot this offseason, and he learns how to finish this offseason, and he learns how to dribble this offseason. Because that's the other thing. You want your primary initiator to be a guy who has a kind of weak handle. It's not abysmal, but it's not much better than like Jaylen Brown 2 years ago. He can functionally dribble the ball, but in terms of making space with that dribble, hell no. None of that's happening here. Oh, yeah, Rudy was happy to point out to me this morning that OKC traded, what was it? You said 4 or 5? 5 second-round picks to draft Dylan Jones with the 26th pick. The Bulls didn't get any draft capital. Not even a second. They got fucking 5 for the 26th pick and what everyone thinks is a terrible draft. So after recording the majority of this video, Dejounte Murray ended up getting traded to the New Orleans Pelicans, so we're going to quickly go over that. The trade involves a 2025 Lakers first-round pick and a 2027 first-round pick that is the least favorable between the Bucks or the Pelicans, so whoever has the better record, you're gonna get that team's pick. And I'm guessing between the Bucks and the Pelicans, both of them are not going to be lottery tier teams in 2027. That's a little too soon. So you're probably not going to get anything higher than in the 20s with that pick. And in the Lakers pick, that could be something good. It really depends on how this season goes for them. I do think there's a lot of variables in that, but I could see them being a playoff team and I could see them not being a playoff team. That's just kind of how it goes when you're one of those more fringe teams in the Western Conference. They made it through the play-in this previous year, so I'm not exactly anticipating them, just having some locked-in playoff spot. Like, this draft pick isn't going to be anything of value, but of course, when you contextualize what Atlanta ended up giving up in exchange for Dejounte Murray, this does look pretty damn bad. They also got back Larry Nance Jr. That was mostly salary filler, but I also think you can flip Larry Nance, maybe not for a first, but for something interesting in the future. Maybe him paired with somebody else gets you into that first-round pick territory, but regardless, not an amazing return, but at the same time, I don't think they ever were going to get an amazing return. Dejounte just very clearly was not the same player he was in San Antonio, and I think that's both because he just kind of dropped off in a few areas, but also because Atlanta was an environment that specifically cultivated him dropping off in those areas. That being defensively, and I guess really just in general, his off-ball game, it didn't necessarily drop off, but it stood out how bad it was now that he had to play alongside Trae Young, and that goes both ways, honestly. These two players just were not meant to play with each other. Two guys who like to dribble the ball can play together, but they can't only dribble the ball because there is only one ball in that instance. Like when that criticism was thrown to like the Brooklyn Nets when they had James Harden in the past, that was kind of silly because Kyrie and Kevin Durant are both very prominent off-ball scorers. But in the case of Dejounte and Trae, both of them are pretty terrible without the ball in their hands. So just a bad fit across the board. That was obvious. It was also plainly obvious that the Hawks would be desperate to get rid of him. But I think the fact that they didn't get back Brandon Ingram in this deal does tell me that they're probably trading Trae. Because realistically, why the fuck would he stick around at this point? He has been in the league long enough. He has been, this was his 6th season, I'm pretty sure. So he's going into year number 7. He's not even that far removed from his rookie extension being expired. So I imagine a trade is around the corner, whether the Hawks want to do it or Trae wants to do it. The thing that is interesting to me about that is that the team that owns the first-round picks for the Atlanta Hawks going forward is the San Antonio Spurs, because they traded for Dejounte Murray and they gave them 2 first-round picks unprotected as well as a swap. I believe one of those picks has already been used, if I'm not mistaken. But since then, they have at least 2 of their picks, and not having those picks and giving them back to Atlanta would be a huge incentive in terms of that trade. But talking about what this means for the Pelicans, I think it's interesting, especially if you do keep Ingram. I don't really know how exactly that's going to work out, because if you have him and Dejounte on the floor at the same time, that's 2 guys who like to have the ball in their hands, who are not great off ball, and who are not terrible three-point shooters, but they're not very good ones, and especially in the case of Ingram, not very high-volume ones. And I think in an ideal world, the three-point shooters that you have around Zion are more reliable than Dejounte Murray and Brandon Ingram are. That said, a Brandon Ingram trade could very well be on the horizon. Something that I would propose, whether it be a direct swap, I really think the Pelicans need to go get Wendell Carter Jr. I think he's probably the cheapest defensive-minded three-point shooting center on the market, and he makes a lot of sense for this team. But yeah, either way, I like this move for the Pelicans, especially because they didn't have to give up a lot. You hope that Dejounte can return back to being an all-defense caliber guy now that he has less of a responsibility offensively, and the situation is less hopeless in Atlanta. There's more good defenders around him, so that incentivizes him to play defense. Ideally, the three ball continues to drop. It's also interesting to consider that the Pelicans have had kind of a playmaking by committee type of thing going on. I think Dejounte gives them a more concrete lead playmaking option, a lead creating guard. I still want to see Zion initiating a lot of action, and if Brandon Ingram's there, of course you want to see him initiating a lot of action, because what is he doing if he's not? So from that point of view, I think it becomes more clear that you might just have to trade the guy. I don't know. It's interesting. I feel like I like this move more for the Pelicans if Brandon Ingram is then traded for ideally a starting center. A starting center is really the main thing you need to look at. Valanciunas is a free agent, and I'm praying to God they do not bring him back, because it seems like a waste of everyone's time. But yeah, I'd give the Pelicans a good grade on that, like B+. The Hawks, I don't know. It's hard to give that a grade because it is highly contextual. You know, obviously it was stupid that they got themselves into the situation to begin with, but in terms of how they got out of it, I think they did fine. I think it'll especially look fine when you compare this with the haul that they're going to get for Trae Young. Decent start to a rebuild, a decent set of assets. Hopefully you can actually build something good with it. But historically, the Atlanta Hawks have literally been statistically the most mediocre franchise in the entire NBA, so I wouldn't bet on it.